to Trudy and friends out there and in here. We're so glad to have another time to spend with you. And we have a special guest today. And I hope that you'll be able to stick around and hear what he's got to say, because he's very important in all our lives. The Reverend Robert L. Johnson of the Tinley United Methodist Church in South Broad Street. And I want to particularly say thank you, sir, for being with us today. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Good to have you with us. It's so important because we have a date coming up, you, I, and all of us, on May the 12th, a very important date. And I thought it was worthwhile to have someone who could sort of praise us as we go into it, because it is that important. And we're talking about the midterm election. Is that what we call that, refer to those things?
Yeah, it's the midterm elections for us. It's not the big election, but it is just as important as it is any other general election.
Why do you think so?
I think that when we look at the midterm elections, or some people call them off-brand elections, they're important because they deal with local issues. They deal with the issues that's going to impact us day to day. And especially around judges and city council and other things, we have to make sure that we make solid choices, because those choices are going to be the ones that we're going to have to live with until the next election. And so it's crucial for grassroots organizations to get together and try to get the constituents to make an informed choice when it comes to the ballot box.
Well, Fervin, before I let the friends in, I'd like to introduce you to, of course, Gary Williams and the one and only Kathy Lee. And they have some important things to ask you about this election. But just to go one step further, about how many different sections are we voting for on that day? Do you happen to know?
I know that we're voting for at least 10. Different sections. Some of the names I'm familiar with, some of the names I'm not. I know that they're all important, but I hope that folk will do their due diligence and see who we're voting for and what categories they're under.
Where can they get the information to actually know what's on the ballot?
Well, there's three sources. The first source that you can go to is the Committee of 70. The Committee of 70 has done a great job in outlining each and every single candidate. The second thing that you can do is that there's another resource in Philadelphia that does it, and that's a grassroots organization called Vote Now. And they have done a good job. And also, if you really want for our community, African American community, the Black Clergy of Philadelphia Vicinity has a listing of all of the candidates.
Well, I know Kathy Lee knows some things about that. So Kathy, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Trudy. And good morning, Reverend. The primaries, I believe they're the primaries. Some people call them midterm. I thought they were the primaries coming up in May. And the primary is what sets the ballot. It lets you know you either eliminate or move a person forward. But all one has to do is look across this country, and you can see where a lot of the power that the federal government even receives starts on the local level, because it is on the local level where voter suppression is being hashed out. It's on that local level, at least at the state level, where it's being hashed out. So to me, every election is needed. But I do recognize that there are a lot of challenges for people to become informed voters. And being an informed voter is of paramount importance, because if you don't know what you're voting for, then you don't know who to vote for.
I know that you're absolutely right. And especially for our community, we kind of get into a monolithic thinking where if it's a D, we vote for you. If it's an R, we reject you. And sometimes we're not voting in our own best interest. Information around who's running and how do they fit the interest of your household, my household, our neighborhoods. Who are we electing for judges? Who are we electing for city council? Who will be a good person to vote for? And when we're not informed, we don't get the best choices at times, I believe.
Gary, you're a reporter for the one of the Brooklyn papers, and I know that you follow this issue there and here. But you're also a Philadelphian, aren't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What I'm about to ask is why isn't it being promoted as much as need be? Like you have these people that are supposed to be in the communities that are the mediators between the public and the politicians, and I haven't seen none of them talking about that particular subject. How do we get them to do that? I mean, there's two that when they first came out, they were all knocking on doors and everything, and then I haven't seen them, and I haven't heard anything from them. And I told them to establish a newspaper, not a newspaper, but a kind of like a paper to get people informed and put it in their mailboxes. And I'm surprised also that the city council people aren't, from what I know, I don't know if you know, Reverend, that they haven't been talking about this much either. I don't know if it has a lot to do with the corona, but everything else is being talked about. So how do we get the people to empower the people to take place in this election that's coming up?
Well, one of the things that I'm finding is that the coronavirus has caused us to rethink the way we do elections, the way that we do campaigning, and the like. Uh, Churches aren't meeting, and churches have been the places where traditionally the candidates would come to meet the constituents that they would ask for their vote. And there is also, to be honest with you, there's this thought, and I hate to say it, there's a thought that they take sometimes our votes for granted because as I said before, they kind of figure that because they are of a certain uh, party or not of a certain party, they won't get our votes, or they will get our votes just by the mere fact that they have that particular party's endorsement. But you're right. You're right, Mr. Williams. The problem that I have is that there are ways that we can organize and galvanize the vote and get the information out. But our community leaders have got to be the one that's going to push this and hold people to account so that they can get the information that's needed to get the vote out and get the voice out.
That sounds like a plan. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to get
Gary,
yeah, I'm going to get it.
You and Kathy went at, no, you and Jerome last week when we were talking, and I was away at that time, but I saw the tape, and you two were really going on it real heavily to try to get people to understand the importance of this vote, even also more important than the presidential vote. Because these are the people who decide our lives, how we're going to live. They make the yes and no's on certain ways of getting your money, of building, of schools, of everything.
Okay, well, full disclosure. I'm going to give you a full disclosure then, since you opened the door. I hear what everyone is saying, but I really truly believe that it is time for us to stop looking outside of ourselves to do what is best for ourselves. So that means that the community needs to create to get involved and stop looking for outside people to always lift them up and do things for them. I'm more than willing to support, and that's what I hear the Reverend saying. That's what I hear Gary saying. But I mean, when I tried to register young people, they were flagging me off. When I asked other people if they were voting, they said, "Oh, I don't vote." And I'm sitting there saying, "But you take the Social Security check, you take whatever other check that comes from I vote." So when are you? It's time for them to be responsible for being a responsible citizen, and stop falling into and then fall into this victimhood thing where you keep blaming outside forces, outside people for doing things to you. When you allow them to do things to you, that's what happened to you. So you have to empower yourself before they have to empower themselves to empower the community. And I'm just looking at it through a different lens in that respect. Get up and do something.
You know, in other words, get up and do something. I know you're saying, and Gary, you had a lot to say about that too.
I think we become complacent because um, I'll go back to Obama. Obama won the election. We got him in. We went out in droves, and then we sat on the couch. Joe Biden got in. We got out in droves. Then we sat back on the couch. I think we now realize from all the things that are happening around us that we can't just sit on the couch after we go out and vote. It's like my grandmother taught me. She said, you can get on your knees and pray, but after you get up from praying, you got to do something. And so that's the scenario that we're left through it. It's like when we finish doing what we had to do, then we relax. So I'm not relaxed, and I'm hearing what Kathy's saying, and it's very true. And the Reverend also. But, you know, how do you get people to get back off the couch after they did the most possible thing that they could possibly do to put themselves in charge? How do you empower them to continue to do that? That's where we're at.
Kind of what I'm concerned about is getting the youth to realize the importance of this election, or any election for that matter. And they have to vote, because if their numbers aren't increased or don't stay up there at the top, we start losing, and we may even lose our privilege and our opportunity and our duty to vote. So those are good reasons to keep it going.
But Trudy,
yes,
there are two people on this screen represented that vote the most in these elections. It's Black women. So Black men need to get up and be men. They need to get up and protect their families with their vote. That's the other thing that happened. Because it was Black women that put Biden in power. It's Black women that put Obama in power. Where were our men, if you really want to get down to it? And if our young men see their fathers voting, maybe that will inspire them to go out and vote. But you know, it's a complicated situation. Reverend, I'm gonna turn it over to you now.
Well, I think there's two things. There's two dynamics we have to look at here. The first thing that I've looked at over the past 20 years that I've seen is there's a fragmented section of our community. Our community is fragmented by socioeconomic. It's fragmented by the fact that we have poor schools. It's fragmented by the fact that the family is fractured. And young people are feeling that, why should I vote? Because nothing's going to change for my particular situation. When I worked with the governor's commission on gerrymandering, and we were trying to write new boundaries for districts, and we found out that the districts were gerrymandered so that African Americans' votes would be split up. We couldn't vote our best interests. And so what I'm saying to you is that Black men, especially Black men who are south of 60, or north of 60, I should say, will understand what it is to vote. You know, my son is 18 years old, and right now, we have drilled into him the importance to vote, the importance to exercise his right to vote. But you know, our young people are not being taught the importance of the vote. And Trudy, exactly right. If we don't vote, if we don't exercise, we're going to lose that right, because we see all across the country, they are trying to restrict the rights of African Americans to vote, because they know that if we ever get conscious and understand how powerful our vote is, we can change this country. And if the city of Philadelphia really wants to see what the Black vote can do, we got to look back to when Wilson Good was voted in, and we can look at and see how, when there's a cause, we can get out and get the vote and get young people. But there's apathy. I'm sorry, there's apathy in our community about our vote.
Then why do we allow them to take? Why do they allow them to control our apathy? In other words, they use that against us. But my whole thing is, when we went out and voted, this is one of the reasons why we are facing this backlash now. So it's a cause and effect. So because Barack Obama got elected, this is Trump emerged, all the other repressive things, the Tea Party, all of that kind of stuff. Because we went out and proved the power of our vote. Now here comes 42, 43 states trying to put in place something to restrict our vote. But I'm going to tell you right now, Reverend, I'm 65, I'm still alive, and I am of the belief that no one can do anything to me unless I allow it to happen. It can't take my right to vote from me unless I concede it.
And
Now, how we protect it is a different story.
We're going to take a pause right there. That's an important thing to bring you right back. Kathy Lee, Gary Williams, and our special guest, the Reverend Robert L. Johnson. And I want to ask all of you, do we feel that the schools are not doing their jobs in teaching our young people at a younger time about the country and how it's run and why? Anyone can take that up?
Okay. The whole thing is that if African American children in this country, even if their parents don't know, when they go to school, I was taught when I went to school, I would come home and I would tell my mother what I learned, and she would correct the things that were incorrect that the teacher was teaching. I don't think that that's taking place, because sometimes the parents don't even have the answers, and sometimes they don't even want to search for the answers, and that's a reality that we have to face. But if they were taught, like I always wondered why African American history is not taught worldwide to people of color. And it seems like it's by design. So with that said, you have to either go research, you know, further than the library, you know, and find information from other sources outside of the schools. So doesn't appear that these teachers that they have, which are mostly Caucasian teachers, are interested in teaching the children. Now, on the city level, on the government level, if you give the school $350 million COVID relief money, where is the money going? And they should give a breakdown of how the money is going to be used. And then they should say, okay, and the city council people possibly that we voted in should say, okay, we want to institute African American culture in all the schools. Okay, we're going to put a percent of that money. We're going to find some books. We're going to do some research. And then we're going to teach these children who they are, kings and queens, not thugs and monsters that kill each other with 500 deaths last year. And that's just the amount of deaths that they know of. You know, it's like, so you have to lift them up, you know. They're not going to church, so church is not the place. But if they're going to the schools, then they got to get something out of the schools, and they got to get something that represents them, and it's not being represented. And I'm surprised that this is happening because of the fact that when the Reverend spoke about how many mayors and stuff that we've had in this city, and we had more than 4 decades of mayors, and it's really like, have things going backwards? I mean, as far as as far as how far we come and how empowered we are to get out and vote, well, what about how far we come to get them to know who they are? That's the issue. Because if I knew I was a king and a queen, I wouldn't be shooting my brother or sister. That's my point.
I'm sure that our new member has just
Excellent.
joined us, Jerome Robertson, has been listening, even though he couldn't say anything. Now's your turn, Jerome.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Miss Trudy and the gang. And in listening to for a minute, the problem with voting or not voting is the allocation of resources. America is the richest country ever in history of the world, and politics and politicians allocate resources to the communities. If you don't vote, you're not going to get allocation of the government or resources. And that is one reason that that is so important for us to vote. So that when the government starts allocating resources, they allocate some of it to the Black community, resources for transportation, resources for infrastructure. You know, voting at the local level is impactful on how you get your trash collected. Your water bill, for instance, legislation that keeps the, and if you don't vote and corporate America gets their way, hey, you'll be poor. And as far as education, I think the Philadelphia school system has a requirement to graduate that you take some course in so-called Black history. And I don't know how effective it is because you're right, Gary, that unless it's reinforced at home, these kids are walking around lost. I mean, on the one hand, in school, you might learn that you come from kings and queens, but if you watch the 6 or 11 o'clock news, you're thugs and gangsters. So, you know, turn off the media, turn on the Trudy Haynes show, but turn off the media and start reading books and get educated, and you will know you'll have a better idea of where you're going if you know how far you've come.
You know, I also want to mention that all of these organizations, the state level, the city level, and even the federal level, they all have programs. Since you all look at your phones, they have them on your phones, and these are free programs that you can get to give you information about what's going on with your government. And it seems to me, Reverend, that not only the schools, but when I was a young kid, we learned everything at the church, in the church, or through the church. Are you doing the best that you can?
Well, you know, as Mr. Williams said, folks just aren't coming to church anymore. And part of that is because I believe in some cases, some, I can't speak for all of them, some the church has abdicated its responsibility to the community. And when I was growing up right here in South Philly, matter of fact, I'm pastoring the church I grew up in, Tenley Temple. I grew up in this church. And I learned Black history here. It was a place off the streets for us. It was the social mecca for us. This was the place where we came and we played basketball and we understood how to coexist with one another. It was the place that that the church was the place where we found out our identity. The church was the place where kids who couldn't go to school found scholarships to go to school. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm saying to you is, now the church has to take on a different role. The church can't be a standalone. The church has to make community alliances with other people in the community to save the children within and the families within that community. But I think that it's got to be more than just preaching and singing. It's got to be education and it's got to be advocacy. And so the church has got to do that and take on that new role if we're going to get the vote out. All the churches I have served, except for 2, were polling places in the church. And we have got to find a way that we can get the word out that, hey, we're open, we're available, but let me educate you on how to vote and get, as Brother Jerome said, and get the resources that are so lacking in our community.
Well, I think there's a need to get some of these young people back in the church for those reasons. I don't know how to tell you to program it, but we've got to do something to make them realize that they're part of this country. And whether they like the things that are happening or not, they have a voice in a vote. And before we go, Kathy, I'd like you to say some couple of things to wind us up.
Well, it would take more than a couple of minutes for me to wind things up, because as a retired teacher of African American history and American history, one of the challenges that a lot of teachers have is you can't teach what you don't know. If you're teaching out of a book, you can't see the whole big picture of how things are fine. Another thing that kind of gets up is we always want to say we're from kings and queens. Ain't all of us ain't from no kings and queens. It's time to be very realistic, teach the truth about that. You had a king and a queen, but that's not who we are. We are a collective that created history, astronomy, all of the arts, everything. And when we want to say that they were just kings and queens, it just kind of it challenges me, because it's an unrealistic portrayal of who we are as human beings on this planet that have made many contributions. So you cannot. The textbooks come out of. They decide what's in there, and they decide what's going to be taught. So that's why your vote is, because since 1890s in the city of Philadelphia, they have been struggling to have quality education for Black children, and it was the church, Reverend, that did that.
Gary, what's your thought of it?
Well, maybe changing the word from kings and queens, but we actually are human beings and not treating each other as such. Let's leave Caucasians out of the picture and just deal with ourselves and see how we treat each other amongst ourselves, which is one of the main problems. Okay, so that's what leads to other things, the envy, the jealousy. I mean, now I'm hearing that the young people on Instagram, Facebook, and this and that, and they're having fights and arguments. And the next thing you know, one person's going to the next person's block and the next person's house based on something that somebody said about them and killing them. Now, what kind of rationale is that somebody said something to you? We used to say sticks and stones may break your bones and words would never harm you. But
that was a lie too, Gary.
It's not funny, but it was a statement. So that statement doesn't apply anymore. I mean, these young people have light, small fuses.
Okay, Jerome.
Hey, all I'm going to say is get out and vote in the May elections. It's very important. And you got to continue the momentum that was started last November. That's it. That's all I'm saying.
Well, the Reverend, we enjoyed having you here, and I'm sure that you have some final words.
I think the major thing that we have to understand is that voting comes from knowledge, and knowledge is power. And understanding the power that we have as a collective body to vote and transform just not our neighborhoods, but our lives is going to be crucial. So get out and vote and exercise your right, because the more we exercise our right, the stronger our community will get.
Well, I think somewhere out there is a message that May 12th is very important, and even building up to that and after that, don't just sit down and become complacent. Take an interest in where you live and how you live by taking advantage of your vote, your voice, and don't forget it. And don't forget us every Wednesday here at 5:30. Trudy and Friends.